What is going on, everyone? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the Season 1 finale of American Gods. Season of television that was very late to the game, too. Basically, I started watching right before Episode 7 came out, but better late than never, as they always say, because I absolutely love the show. As I mentioned in a previous video, my interest in mythology and fantasy and D&D and all that kind of stuff goes back to my early childhood. And there are not a lot of shows and movies who tackle myth in a really satisfying way for diehard nerds on that front. And the fact that Neil Gaiman found a way to make all these ancient myths and all these new deities like technology and media in the world have relevance in this godlike confrontation between all these various forces is nothing short of a remarkable achievement. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that I will devour the book between now and next year, because we sadly aren't going to get any more American Gods for probably the next year. Luckily, it has found an audience. Luckily, Starz has faith in the show and has greenlit a second season. But let's dig into a little bit of what was resolved and or introduced in this final episode, because it's all we have to discuss for a very long time. But for people who have not seen American Gods, just start at the beginning. I mean, it combines sex and violence and myth and road trips and great acting. It has so many incredible ingredients. I totally get if some people just say, hey, it's quote-unquote too weird, but that is their loss. If you've ever enjoyed a tale about a mythological creature or a fairy tale or anything in your life, and you want to see that incorporated into a modern setting, American Gods is definitely going to be right up your alley. By far, my favorite part of the show is the fact that each episode begins with like a fable or a parable or a tale of something involving one of the gods in the distant past. But in the case of this episode, we have Mr. Nancy talking to Mr. Wednesday and Shadow, telling them the story of Bilquis, if I'm saying her name correctly. She's a recurring character. She's been around the whole season. I can't pronounce the actress's name either, like Yetide or Yetide Bataki. She's playing Bilquis, an old goddess of love, or Queen of Sheba. She has a lot of different aliases, but we get this incredible sequence where she is essentially like kind of the queen of love, or the ultimate queen, and you have this giant orgy with people of all ethnicities and all genders just writhing about in pleasure, all just sucking and fucking and touching and feeling, and just, it is a giant, crazy, orgasmic mess. And it blows my mind that here we are in 2017, where this kind of stuff we see on television, but we almost never see it in movies. I mean, movies used to be where you would see your R-rated entertainment, is where you would see your really cutting-edge stuff. And now it seems like movies either get bigger and bigger and more PG-13 oriented or more family-friendly oriented, and TV has quietly taken over this part of the entertainment industry, where if you want some hardcore graphic sex and violence in your shows like American Gods are going to provide it. And I have to say, when it comes to sex in TV, I can't think of any show that's more graphic than American Gods, and this scene obviously was quite an eyebrow raiser in a lot of ways. But we get this great narrative. We see her seducing kings. We see her basically absorbing them into her body. She turns all of her worshippers into this giant black soup that she also absorbs. I mean, in the ancient days, she was obviously a very powerful deity. And then we see her evolving through the times. We see her in 1979 in Tehran going to this great nightclub sequence, and she's seducing this beautiful girl. But before that can really go down, we see, I believe that's when there's a giant, essentially like a revolution in Iran in 1979. I'd have to check my facts on that. In the context of the show, we see how there's a major shift in power in that country, forcing her to flee. We see how in the 80s the arrival of AIDS and people becoming HIV positive had a major impact on her. And eventually, as a goddess, she just slowly but surely forgets her own identity. She's essentially a homeless person wandering the streets, and she's got all these sores on her face, and she's just a mess. But then one day, technology comes to see her and basically says, like, it's time for her to rise again. And through the power of social media, she will re-achieve her divine goddess status that she rightly deserves. And I just think it's such a brilliant twist that you would have essentially Instagram or Tinder or whatever app you want to substitute, and now a goddess of love, of course, in the modern era, would use that to gain more followers, to gain more lovers, and then we see her resurrection. And so, yeah, that had to be my favorite part of the episode, just seeing the story of this goddess. And also, if anyone knows the correct pronunciation of that goddess name, Bilquis, please let me know. I'm assuming that I'm probably completely butchering the pronunciation. But the rest of the episode is this fantastic series of confrontations at this giant party in Kentucky being hosted by Easter. And Easter, in the context of this show, played by Kristen Chenoweth, who's absolutely adorable in the role. But as we learn, Easter is a very, very ancient tradition. It's essentially a pagan holiday dating back 12,000 years to celebrate the arrival of spring, and that Christians, they essentially hijacked the holiday by combining it with the rebirth of Jesus. And this party is fascinating because you have all these different Jesuses from all around the world, different ethnicities and that sort of thing. We have Jeremy Davies, who's playing kind of like a hippie Jesus in a lot of ways. But Jeremy Davies is also right now in the show Twin Peaks, so he is just on fire, appearing in some really, really good TV. But we see how Easter, sadly, she no longer has the stature that she deserves or wishes to have, because her divinity and her holiday is now being shared by so many other people. But Wednesday and Shadow have essentially come to her party to recruit her over to their side. Wednesday lies to her about what happened to Vulcan. He basically says that he had recruited Vulcan to his side and that technology and the world and media killed him for choosing sides with Wednesday. Shadow takes note of that because Shadow is not a man necessarily of faith, nor is he even a man really totally on board with Wednesday's agenda. He's always got a bit of a wait-and-see attitude, which is probably smart. We have one or two brief scenes away from this party. We have this one great scene where Bilquis and technology get together, and he has this great line about how he has no intentions of feeding her soul from her vagina nebula. And I guess if I'm ever in a position where I want to turn someone down who's making sexual advances to me, maybe if I'm clever enough, I'll remember that line, but that just absolutely made me crack up. But the big curveball of this episode is the arrival of Laura and Mad Sweeney. Laura is full-on decaying now. She's vomiting up maggots. I mean, she's falling to pieces. Her eyes are gray. I mean, in the previous episode, we saw when she temporarily lost her coin, her eyes went gray, and it was really creepy. But now she's so rotten, they're pretty much gray all the time. But she's hoping that Easter will be able to restore her or return her to life. Easter looks into her eyes to figure out what was her manner of death. But when Easter realizes that she was slain by a god, essentially sacrificed to a god, that is beyond her power to restore. So at that point, Laura gets justifiably pissed and just grabs Mad Sweeney by the balls and pins him up against the wall and just basically threatens to squeeze his balls right out of his ball sack. And then he finally admits that it was Wednesday who had her sacrificed, and that it's all part of a grand scheme or plan that he's been putting together. So the episode finally builds to this fantastic confrontation where you have Wednesday facing off against media technology in the world, and they are just talking all kinds of shit about how he's old, he's irrelevant, that the world has moved on, that he's forgotten, like just all this shit about how he no longer has a place in this world and that his time on this earth is officially over. And then he demonstrates his power very overtly, calls down a lightning bolt, which is used to very great dramatic effect. Shadow finally says, "Who are you?" Ian McShane has this great bit where he basically rattles off all of his various names, all of his various roles. He talks about his ravens. And for people who haven't read the books and haven't been looking ahead, it probably was quite the revelation when he finally admits that he is the All-Father. He is Odin. He's basically the most powerful deity in Norse mythology. For Marvel Comics fans, that is Thor's father, who's played by Anthony Hopkins in the Marvel Comics, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I've always been a big fan of Odin. Total badass. Very, very powerful. And if you're going to cast Odin in a show, of course you're going to hire Ian McShane because he's just this powerhouse juggernaut of an actor. And yeah, ever since Deadwood, I've just been a colossal fan of his. But the beautiful thing is, he tells Easter at that point to show everybody what she's capable of. And it's almost like for the first time in millennia, she finally decides to really cut loose. And she essentially steals the green away from the planet. Crops dry up, trees wither and die, everything as far as the eye can see turns gray. Odin tells his adversaries, look, tell your followers, tell the believers, tell the non-believers that they can have their spring back when they pray for it. So it's a killer cliffhanger because we don't quite know what's going to happen. All we know is that the stakes have been raised, the battle lines have been drawn. It'll be fascinating to see who chooses which side. The final scene is of Bilquis riding around on a bus and consuming yet another lover. And I'm assuming she'll be, at least initially, on the side of the new gods and that technology really helped her in her resurrection, but she seems like one of the oldest deities of all, and I imagine her loyalties eventually will be with Odin, or at least I hope they will be, because I really like that character and I want her to be on the side of the good guys. There are a lot of shows that tackle fantasy and sci-fi and these kind of concepts, but very few do these like genuine, sincere deep dives into what makes these stories tick, why these stories remain fascinating for thousands of years. I mean, the Iliad, I have no idea when Homer wrote the Iliad. I mean, it was part of the oral tradition, but it is easily 2,000 years old. I mean, these stories survive over generations because they have relevance and they matter. And the fact that they draw such a distinction between these old faiths and how they basically gave people a sense of meaning and purpose versus media and technology, which essentially just try to find new and more innovative ways to distract us, I think is an interesting contrast. I don't completely subscribe to that black and white view of media and technology only being a distraction, because here I am making a video for YouTube. I obviously think a lot of this technology has enormous value and I absolutely love it. I'm totally addicted, but for the purposes of drama, this is just brilliant storytelling. I'm totally in. Can't wait to check out the book. And also, I've read a ton of Neil Gaiman comics. I don't think I've ever actually read a novel of his. I've read a few short stories. He's an iconic writer in so many ways, so I've been neglecting my duties to not do the deep dive into any of his long-form fiction. So as much as I might have loved the Sandman comics, time for me to actually read a book. Thank you so much again for everybody on this channel who recommended that I dip into American Gods. I've absolutely loved the ride. It's been absolutely incredible. And yeah, I'll be talking about this show again a year from now. But for now, obviously, going to continue to cover Twin Peaks. Going to be tackling Game of Thrones in the very near future. And I've been getting some interesting suggestions about some other shows to add to the lineup, so please keep the suggestions coming. I'm thinking about dipping my toes into the world of Blood Drive on the Sci-Fi Channel, but I would love to have one or two more shows that I'm reviewing on a regular basis. We live in this incredible era where there's just so much great stuff out there to explore, but oftentimes it's very easy to get lost. Because I feel like in the world of TV, there's a shitload of pretty good TV, but only a handful of shows that are really standout heavyweight champions, and so those are the ones I really want to focus on. So yeah, Better Call Saul is a show I'm planning on getting caught up on before next year. There's a lot of good things that I want to get caught up on. So thanks again as always for watching. Thanks for the suggestions. Please give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax if you want to talk more, and I'll be back at y'all Wednesday for the season finale of Fargo. Looking forward to it. Onwards and upwards.